So, one of the questions that folks frequently have when they are applying for jobs outside of academia is, uh-oh, how do I answer the question, why are you leaving academia? They have it in mind that people are going to ask them this. And in fact, I had a client a while back last year who was directly asked this question. In fact, the version he was asked was, are you planning to go back to academia? And he was asked this by a recruiter in like a first round, like a screening call. And it totally threw him off guard. And so we want in this video to talk about, yeah, that question, how to answer it, how not to answer it, right? Let's talk about how not to answer it, and then tell you how to answer it. And the key to that will be to understand what the person asking you is actually trying to get from you, right? So that's what this video is all about. Thanks for being here. And of course, please do subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, because I will be publishing more content to come. I work with professors, postdocs, and other longtime academics who are ready to change careers. Cool. So I already shared like that quick anecdote about my client, but it is really something that comes up a lot on social media, for example, and in my coaching calls. Like, how do I answer this? And one of the things that happens is that people don't care, but as my experience shows, it does come up. So let me stop talking because Tori, you're here too. You're here too.
Yay!
What do you
Happy
say
to be
about
here
this?
and happy to chat with you about this, Jen, because I think it's really important for folks to just prep a little bit. You don't need to have a memorized speech here, but if you have an answer prepared here, you're going to be far more prepared to answer than if you're in that deer in the headlights moment. And I think we were just talking about, this question, why are you leaving academia, comes with the correlate of why do you want this job? And actually, even if you get answered ask the first question, you want to answer the second. Do the politician thing and answer the question you wish was asked, which is, okay, why do I want this job? And this is my chance to tell you. This is my chance to tell you this story. And if you don't have a story for why you want the job and you're sitting in an interview, that's a problem, right? Like you should have a genuine reason why you want to work there. And so really before an interview, reflect on why you want the job and be ready to tell that story in case this question comes up, because there are all sorts of bad ways to answer this question. Maybe we can talk about those first, of like how not to answer this question.
Yeah, and you're already you're sort of jumping ahead here because you're alluding to Tori, have done the work of the two-step process of what is the question, what is the real question. And so I think the problem comes when people answer the question, why are you leaving academia, right? Do you plan to go back to academia? And then if you just answer the question as asked, the way it was asked, right, on that surface level, then you get into, well, there are no jobs, toxic workplace, the college is closing, the collapse of the sector, the politics in Texas and Wyoming and Florida, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I can't actually teach sociology, like all of these really crappy reasons that explain why you're not going back. They might not be so crappy, but then I'm just imagining the recruiter's eyes are starting to glaze over because that's not actually what they care about. So big X, right? That is not the way to answer this question. And why? Not only because I don't care about, but why else?
Well, and I'll just use a metaphor here that was coming to mind. So this is about the push factors, right? When someone says, why are you leaving academia? If you talk about the push factors, the factors that are pushing you out, runs the risk of sounding like this. Say you were walking into an ice cream shop, and that person actually started that ice cream shop themselves. They crafted their ice cream flavors. They put them out in beautiful display cases to try to sell ice cream that they were really proud of. And you run into their shop and they say like, hey, what brought you here today? You say, well, the other ice cream shop that I like is on fire. And so I ran in here because it was the first place I saw. How's that person going to feel, right? Like they have put craft into their work, and that you're only there because you're running out of something else doesn't feel good. Where take that same ice cream shop owner and say to them, actually, I heard about you and I heard that you artisanally pick these flavors. All of a sudden, you've made that person's day. You've lit them up. And the good news about an ice cream shop is you don't actually have to impress the owner. They're going to serve you anyway. But in an interview conversation, the person on the other side of the table has pride usually in where they work. They have chosen to work there. And if you come in and basically say, I'm only here because the place I'm leaving was on fire, doesn't make them feel very good about wanting to bring you into their fold.
I,
Does that resonate in
yeah, I
terms of
think
a metaphor?
that's a great metaphor for this. I mean, another way of coming at the similar concept is you don't want to be bad mouthing a previous employer or your sort of an industry in general when, you're on a job interview, or it's not even a job interview, right? Because you could be networking with people and this is the kind of question that could come up all the time. And you just don't want to be negative. It's a human thing, right? Like, yes, of course, there's a time and a place for complaining, but when you're in a professional uh, a conversation situation, whether it's a formal interview, an informational interview, or just kind of, chatting with people at a conference or whatever it is, you want to try and like be your better self. You just don't want to come across as a complainer.
Well, and really here, like the cartoon character of Eeyore, right, who just like sees the bad side of everything. And it's hard because often as academics, we're trained to see flaws. We're trained to see everything and to be like, well, here's what's wrong with this, here's the gap. But if you do that with the work environment, right, like there's no good work out there anywhere, all employers stink, so I'm just looking for one that's a little less crappy than the last. When folks are talking to folks about job opportunities, they want to feel a sense of possibility, a sense of openness to experience. And so really checking with yourself as a job seeker, hey, am I in that Eeyore mindset? And if so, I want to look at that before I go out and interview because it's going to really hinder you. Or can I genuinely find things that I am curious about, excited about? Because those are going to be conversation furtherers, where the Eeyore conversations are generally conversation stoppers. Oh, okay, you believe that all workplaces stink? Well, maybe go be a monk for a while, right? Like maybe you want to go leave the workplace entirely. Like, awesome, but that's not what I'm doing here, right? So it really, the complaining, the negativity, the closedness, not saying those things are wrong. Like I have experienced those at point in my life, like process them, be with them. But if you're bringing them to a networking conversation or interview setting, they're going to be things that put on the brakes rather than allow you to keep moving forward.
Yeah, like this is not an opportunity for you to educate your listener on the woes of the academic or higher ed sector. That's not like the task here, right? So, like, let's not go there. The other thing, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, and I think it's worth saying explicitly, is that you put you when you focus on the negative, when you complain, as even if you're totally right about it, you can give the impression that you personally are actually the problem, that maybe it wasn't the employer that was at fault for all of these woes, like especially if the person is not familiar with higher ed and academic sector, but they think like, oh dang, that person sounds like she would be difficult to work with, right? And you just like don't even want to go there. Just don't even want to go there. So I feel like what we're talking about here is like, again, like two things. One is, what is your personal answer to this question? Why are you leaving academia? Would you, are you going to go back like a year from now? And so there's like that personal answer that you can come up with. And to your point, Tori, focus on what is it, the pull factors, the things that yeah, not the push factors.
Things that are pulling you towards the new opportunity. And again, like if I'm honest about reasons I left, which I think I have far more clarity on maybe 10 years ago than I did in the moment, right? There were a lot of things I was frustrated and disappointed by. And just speaking to those on the other side of the table, it's really hard then for the listener to say, okay, how long until they feel that frustrated and disappointed with me, right? Like, oh, okay, you're frustrated by that? Like, you're probably going to feel that same way towards me. And like, what am I going to do? They almost will identify with the other employer, even if it's not correct, right? Like there are circumstances in academics that are not going to carry over. And so it's a new environment. but it's very tough as a listener not to assume that the person's going to bring something with them. And so even if there are real reasons that you can write out, like write out for yourself, hey, why am I leaving? Like all these things about toxicity, limited growth, limited opportunities, whatever it is. But then when you go into conversations, focus on the pull factors, which should be equally true, right? Ideally, you have like a list of 10 reasons that you're leaving, and you're just going to pull 2 reasons off the list that aren't lies. We don't want you to go out and make up reasons, but just say, okay, here are the 10 reasons. These are the 2 that I think are not going to shut down conversations. And so being honest with yourself about your reasons and then looking at which ones you want to highlight, that's intentionality and choice rather than anything around obfuscating.
Yeah, it's really important. So then, okay, so now you know for yourself your reasons. Good. And you've made that shift of like, okay, what are the good things that I'm going toward that I want to look for next? How do you turn that into an answer to this question? If it ever comes up, right? Like, why are you leaving? Would you ever consider going back? Right? How do you answer that? And you can see my eyes moving. I took some notes on this a while back, so I'm just looking at my notes here. So in terms of crafting an answer to the question, right, remember what Tori you said earlier about what is the question they're actually asking you? Tell us again. What is the question they're actually asking?
They're asking, why do you want this job?
Why do you want this job? Why did you apply for this job? Why are we having this conversation? Or in an informational interview context, it's like, what, like, wow, why are we talking? Like, what? Anyways, you feel me. Okay, so how do you answer this? So the framework for you, this is advice I've given my clients in the past, is it is good to acknowledge your past experience, right? Like if you're coming from an academic environment, or in the case of my client, like that is an experience that you had at some point in the past, even if it wasn't current. Like, yeah, you can acknowledge the positive things. Like, I was really appreciative. I learned so much. I got really valued, like whatever it is, right? There might be certain prompts, but quickly, right? Quickly. So you're not throwing anybody under the bus. And then you want to highlight your transferable skills and interests. So a way that this might be phrased is like, well, something I learned about myself was, or the last project that I worked on, in that environment was X, and I realized, right? And so you just want to really play up that that experience was a positive one for you, and it's what has now led you to take a new direction. So that's the next thing that you want to focus on is clearly state your decision to shift into this new career direction, right? And you can tie it directly to those skills and interests, experience that you want to have going forward. And guess what? Guess what? That's why I applied to this job, right? Because I was really drawn to, the project around, or the opportunity to, or the challenge of, right? Like whatever it is, that is how you answer this question. And that's going to feel great, right?
100%. So much more energy there, right? And again, like the ice cream person, like, I want your ice cream because it is craft made. Like it just feels more exciting. And so it's really important to think through the things you're talking about and think through, how am I going to articulate what it is I want to do here? And it's funny, I was reflecting on, have I been asked this question during interview processes? And, I think I've probably been through maybe 6 or 7 full interview processes since leaving academia, and maybe many more phone screens where I just sort of pick up from a recruiter and see what they're talking about. And I would say 100% of them, they ask some reason of what's got you looking to move, right? Like, what are you looking for? And so you're going to continue to be asked this question throughout your career, whether it's speaking to leaving academia or leaving a current role. So be ready to answer it. When I think of answers to this, I think of sort of 4 categories of socially acceptable reasons to leave, right? And a lot of times there are like, I don't work well with my supervisor, or there's something about this company is like falling apart, or something like that. Like those folks don't mention as often. But the things that folks mention, some of which PhDs can use, more impact. That was the one I used when I was leaving. And it was really true. Like PhDs, I was tell this story about like, you publish a paper and then it goes and sits on a library shelf and maybe 3 people read it. I want to have real impact. And realistically, when I went and worked for Facebook, I did. You can question whether that impact is a good thing for the world, but I could actually point to people on the phones and say, like, yeah, see that box? That box is there because of data I analyzed and something we shipped as a result, right? So like real impact in the world. And so the more impact usually makes whoever you're talking to feeling good, right? Like, oh, we do have impact here. Okay, this person's coming to have impact with us. So more impact. I would say the second is mission alignment, right? I believe in your mission. I believe in what you're doing. I love your brand, whatever it is. You saying that you're really excited about their broader concept usually plays well. Third is something around broad and expertise. And this works a little bit better after academics, where you can say, like, I've been working at a B2B company and I want to stretch to B2C, right? Where it's more of this sideways move. But you could also say, like, I've been working on, say, data focused question in academia, and I really want to put those into play with topics in your business area, right? And so this sort of like, I want to broaden my expertise works well. And then really, I think anything where you highlight upsides of the organization, right? So that fourth is just like, say something good about them. Like, you folks are innovative, you're more mature, you're fast moving, you're fast growing, love your product. Any of that stuff plays really well because it's basically speaking to the genuine excitement you have about that place and that opportunity. All right,
Yeah,
I'll
it's
pause. That was a lot of reason. How did
no,
those
it's
sound?
great. Yeah, like those are really great, right? Because you're not shitting on your previous employer, right? And you're not implying that you made a crappy career choice, right? It's all about like this is all good stuff. This has all been heading you into a certain direction, that you are growth oriented, right? That you are interested in professional development, personal development. Like these are all things that good employers that you want to work for want. Yeah, so let me share. I was asked I don't even remember what the question was, but I remember in an interview, I remembered speaking about how, as somebody who was self-employed and often worked one-on-one with people, that was really fulfilling, right? It was really meaningful to guide someone through a certain process, and I got a lot of really positive feedback in my work. But the particular nature of my work means that my impact in terms of my client work is relatively limited. I mean, we could talk about impact on social media, whatever, right? And so this opportunity that I was interviewing for, I would be working within a large university. And so that's, even though the work had some parallels to it, exactly your point of impact, the kind of impact that I would have would just be different, right? And so I remember exactly as you're saying, talking about how I was interested in it, not because I didn't like what I was doing running my business, but because this would be a new way of approaching this general topic. And that was just interesting, right? As a person who is interested in having different and new experiences and in bringing yeah, just like bringing that depth and breadth of experiences to other things. And so it could be compelling for them as well.
Yeah, no, and it's really, as you were talking about it, I was picturing this image of almost like you're not talking down where you're coming from. You're basically saying, like, what I do is this, and there's this missing piece. I'd like to find this missing piece and sort of move over to there, right? And it really just makes it more of this horizontal movement, as opposed to like, I'm going to really put down my former employer, or worst case, like put down the employer you're talking to. Like, I don't really think you guys are that good, but you had an open position. Like, don't do that, right? And anyone who you're talking to in an informational interview, do them the courtesy of saying, I'm interested, I'm curious about what you're doing, I'm excited about your company, your role, whatever it is. Because that if they're taking the time to actually spend time with you, whether via an info chat or a formal interview, the only taking that on if you're genuinely interested, and then genuinely showing that interest or curiosity is a better way to operate than sort of doing things out of a feeling of obligation or looking for the least crap option, because that just, people don't really like to hear that when they're on the other side.
Yeah, the other thing that's really important here is that, when you've figured out what you're going toward and that you're expressing that to people who are in a position to make decisions about whether they want to, invite you to do that work going forward, is that yeah, when you communicate to them what you want, they have an opportunity to say, oh, actually, that's not what this is about. And that's really important too, because you do want to be able to express what you do want to go toward. And if that's actually not what's on offer, despite, their job ad or whatever, that's great too. So you can feel really confident. I mean, I want you to feel really confident in the answer that you're giving, that you are putting your cards on the table.
No, and I do think in terms of the here's what I want cards, you want to be quite honest about those. In terms of the here are the bad past experiences I've had, those are cards that you can keep in the deck, right? And so really, if I'm saying here, like it is, if I'm circling back, like it is totally valid to have all sorts of reasons to leave academia that are these push factors, right? The toxicity, the lack of jobs and resources, all the things that make academia problematic. Okay to have those as part of your personal decision making. But whenever you're talking to someone who's not a close friend, right? Like have a couple of friends who you're really just venting with. But if you're talking to folks about opportunities, always focusing on these positive factors, these pull factors, this sense of opportunity and possibility that allows you to just keep the energy train going, right? Keep the momentum train going as opposed to slamming it on the brakes. It doesn't invalidate that those feelings are real and justified, just doesn't mean that they will serve you in the path forward.
I did a workshop yesterday, and in the feedback at the end, I always ask for feedback in my workshops. And at the feedback in the end, somebody wrote, I still need to process grief before I can really dive into writing resume bullet points, whatever. But I'm thinking about that because what happens if you're watching this video, listening to us talk, and you realize, but I don't have any pull reasons. I don't know actually what I'm going toward. Okay. I'm glad that you've watched because you're not ready to do great job interviews yet. Not because you suck and not because you're not ready to change careers, but because you need to go back a step and figure out what you do want to go toward. Right. So like let this be a push for you to figure out your pull factors, if I can say that.
100%, 100%. No, and it's a great point that like if you're listening to this and you don't feel any pull factors, that's a good indicator. And that's one of the drivers of I think this ineffective job search strategy that I see from academics that I call spray and pray, which is like I'm just going to send resumes out everywhere and let them pick me and pick where I want to go. Like no, like don't let them pick you, you pick them, right? And so only apply to jobs where you have a genuine story. If you don't have one, stop applying. Take a beat, process, get intentional, and just save yourself a lot of pain. My goodness, the sort of sending job applications out and waiting for them to pick you and letting them choose why you're leaving and where you're going. Don't give up your power like that, right? Like take your power of your story of why you're leaving back into your hands.
That's great. I think that's it. Anything else? Any pearls of wisdom you want to share?
No, take your power back. Leave academia and take your reasons and hold them from a powerful place. I think that's a decent place to end.
Awesome. Yeah, great. Thanks, Tori. See you next time.